What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, reviewing today Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. Now, of course, this video is going to be talking about an MMORPG, so trying to review it is very complicated because seeing everything in a game this massive is completely impossible. But instead, what I want to do is tell you about my journey this year with Final Fantasy XIV in general, and really outline what I think is the best of the best, and the parts that still kinda downright suck. To start with, let me just say that this is easily the very best online game out there right now. I mean, if you are looking for a giant digital world to get involved with, make friends, and cast some giant spells, this is the one you definitely should be playing. So I picked it up just a couple months ago, basically in January, and I decided to power level a class. I played this back at launch when A Realm Reborn, the reboot, originally came out, and I liked it, but it didn't seem like it had enough content at the time. Here we are though, 6 years later, and it seems like they've managed to flesh this world out and give it a huge amount of stuff to do. Now, throughout this video, you're going to notice two things at once, which is that I played a lot of different classes and leveled them up, but I also played on both of the platforms. I beat this pretty predominantly on PC and also PS4, just because I wanted to see what the full experience was like. Now, initially, I decided to level up a black mage, and then I moved on to a samurai, and then a paladin, and now a gunbreaker here in Shadowbringers. And something that really struck me is that this game constantly likes to shift itself around. Talking specifically about Shadowbringers, this is the newest downloadable content, the massive expansion that just released. And you can tell that the game doesn't mind making giant risks. Like just talking about Shadowbringers itself, because this is the newest content, all of a sudden now everything is just so bright and colorful. Even the bad guys themselves are entities of pure light who have basically become evil angels who are killing off the entire populace of this new world. Something I absolutely love the most about Final Fantasy XIV is that graphically it is a bit of a powerhouse. It is just so freaking crazy how much they managed to make this world seem so bright and vibrant and just real. I mean, when I'm trying to walk through these fields of flowers or flying on one of my mounts through a destroyed oasis, it's just so crazy that this is a universe crafted by artists with such a heavy level of detail. As I've been going through the newest stuff here in the Shadowbringers expansion, I also got to admire the fact that they make this game continually harder and more complicated. So some of the earliest dungeons when you're leveling up can be ultra simplistic. Stuff that they like to say are just tank and spank encounters, where basically a strong enemy walks up, the aggro keeper manages to hold it in place, and all of us damage dealers burn it down. Stuff that's not necessarily boring, but can basically be done while listening to a podcast. As the game's gone on though, through things like Heaven's Sword and Stormblood, each of the expansions have built up a sort of trust with the community. They realize that the people who are beating this content are intelligent enough to handle the tougher encounters, and so over time they've introduced bigger raids, crazier encounters, and stuff like this guy, which is a huge god of weaponry who constantly tries to shift himself into different modes, and eventually even starts busting out a huge giant blade that tries to crush the entire enemy team at once. These encounters are nothing short of extraordinary and really highlight the fact that this game just keeps getting better. But I'm really impressed about the fact that Shadowbringers itself is honestly tough. Even now, going through some of the first dungeons of this new expansion, I've noticed the fact that they do not mind screwing with your head. It's really just one of those games where you can tell that the developers don't mind trying to kill you, because if you can't beat it, maybe you don't deserve it. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about, well, the general nature of the classes. As I've been playing this game a bunch this year, I've noticed that not all of them are created equal. The ones I've played the most seem very fun, but there's definitely a gap between their storylines. Some of them are just super simplistic or silly or basic, like, hey, you're a black mage, mage. You gotta go do stuff like find the other black mages. Whereas when you're doing the samurai quest line, it's a deep, moving adventure that tells you about the cost of living your life by the blade. I mean, it's something that's just so deep and crazy, and it definitely kind of highlights the fact that there's definitely a little bit of a gap between older content and newer content. Going through Shadowbringers especially, I noticed that the storyline is perhaps the best it's ever been. As our hero, we're now transported into this alternate universe, basically, called the Shard, and we get to see these grand cities and people stuck in eternal struggle against these evil angels. It's really complex, it's really deep, and it is really, really good. But it kind of makes it where, whenever I have to go back and do older quest lines, now they seem so boring and just uninteresting by comparison. I guess that's kind of the price. There's a term I've used in the past, which is that I love reading a lot of books. I basically study different fiction and fantasy novels, and there's a term I like, which is creation inflation. I've used this because it's essentially the fact that the longer something goes on, you have to be even bigger and even more insane to still get that same feeling of shock. And I think that Shadowbringers seems like it might be the pinnacle. We're now at a point where the writing is so good, the cities are so alive, the combat is so explosive that even a random fate out in the fields seems like this crazy ultimate struggle. I think that this might be the very best the game is ever going to be, or at least that's the way I imagine it, because right now it is just so close to perfect. I love the fact that this game manages to play so well on the PlayStation 4 or the freaking PC. The fact that even if I'm holding a controller and just trying to run a random dungeon, I can just start slinging fire and blowing stuff up and calling down the forces of lightning, and it all just feels right. The game is good, but beyond this, I have to say that a huge aspect of why this huge fictional universe works so exceptionally well is really the players within it. Sometimes there are online games that have a little bit of a toxic community. People who are just so obsessed with being super skilled that they kind of just disregard the newer players. This is not at all the case with Final Fantasy XIV. This is easily one of the friendliest communities of any online game I have ever witnessed. When I'm just standing in town, random people walk up and talk to me. If I have a question, they will give me an answer. There have been so many occurrences where I literally just saw a dude standing on a bridge and I was like, "Hey man, I really like the way your character looks." And he said, "Hey, I'm just standing around. Do you want to do some dungeons?" And we end up playing together for hours and having an absolute blast. Within this world, strangers can easily become friends because the community itself is just so focused on the bright, delicious world that's constructed around us. Graphically, this is great. Artistically, this is great. When it comes to the music, it is great. There's so much in this that's so easy to grab onto and love, and I have to say that in general, I think that it is a spectacular experience. But there is one giant flaw that, to this day, really aggravates me. After playing this game for 6 solid months, almost every single day, I'm very aggravated about the fact that they still have not done anything to fix the PvP. Perhaps my very favorite thing to do in any sort of MMORPG is the player versus player combat. Getting to jump into arenas and really test your skills against other people in the world is perhaps the very best part of it. I love that there's this interesting test to your own aptitude, but in Final Fantasy XIV, the player versus player combat is pathetic, and I'm being serious about that. Basically, they take away about 90% of your skills, give you very simplistic versions of the skills you do like, and you just basically get dropped into these arenas to compete in very strict, very straightforward fights. It is so bad, and I genuinely believe that the developers just don't care about this. It seems like, for the most part, people that are playing Final Fantasy XIV enjoy the huge boss encounters and the deep lore, and they're just not even interested about trying to actually test out these arenas and try this stuff. And I really do feel like that if they just spent a little bit more time fleshing this out and trying their best to expand on these concepts and expand on these gauntlets, maybe these arenas would become more popular, because as of now, PvP when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV is practically dead, which is a disappointing concept. I really do have to say though that for the most part, I just completely love this world. The Shadowbringers content is introducing so much new stuff, like new races to play as, and the Gunbreaker class, which just has such an interesting bullet combo system that constantly amplifies your power the longer a fight goes on. There are twists and turns to just the little individual fights that I think are brilliant because you have to test them, you have to study them, you have to really try and advance your own skill to play this game at all. I really admire what this game has managed to achieve from its very broken beginnings back in 1.0 to the reboot in A Realm Reborn, and now it feels like we're seeing a true second reboot, a second renaissance, a second coming to this game, and I gotta say, I'm very happy that I'm here to see it. I'm going to be playing a bunch more of this game, and certainly this is going to be my primary MMO. It's not my favorite game of the year, but it's certainly my favorite freaking MMORPG right now. Okay, so these have just been some off-the-cuff thoughts because, quite frankly, I'm just having so much fun, I kind of wanted to yell about it. Are you playing Final Fantasy XIV still, or do you think that this is a game that is just not worth your time? Perhaps you hate MMORPGs, and I still think that even players who wouldn't normally be into this genre should definitely check this one out because it has a great story, a great focus, and a lot of great stuff to just make you love being in this universe. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do it the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Oh, and by the way, so I'm sure a lot of you can see the fact that my full screen name is actually visible in this video, and I'll just make you guys a deal. Anybody who friend requests me within Final Fantasy XIV, I will accept every single friend request. I want to be able to play with you guys, and honestly, I just love having new people to quest with and do dungeons. So even if your name is Mr. Poopy Butthole, I promise that I'll accept it, and we can all play together. Alright, sound good? Alright, see you in Final Fantasy XIV. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.